Frank Seravalli, brought to you by the Wendy's Daily Face-Off Survivor Pool game. Wendy's is letting you win real food with Wendy's Daily Face-Off Survivor. For those of you who smoke the competition, Wendy's is rewarding you with weekly prizes that will have you winning. Download the Wendy's app and score yourself 150 bonus reward points on your first order and grab a sweet victory from the mouth-watering jaws of defeat, along with some fresh, never frozen beef. Put your prediction skills to the test and score yourself 1,300 bonus points if you win the week. Then you go use your points to grab your favorite menu items at Wendy's. Sign up to play Wendy's Daily Face-Off Survivor Fantasy to win weekly prizes like the spicy chicken sandwich from Wendy's and the Wendy's app. Daily Face-Off Survivor over at dailyfaceoff.com. And let's bring them in. Frank, this is a topic that I didn't want to have to bring up on top of the show. No one likes talking about this, but we have.
What, how bad I am at the Wendy's Daily Survivor game?
No, trust me, we talked.
Pedersen killed me on Monday night.
Same.
He knocked me out for the week. I just figured 1 point, stone cold mortal lock for him to just get one measly point. And for the third week in a row, I was eliminated on day one.
Yeah, same. Anyways, I don't want to talk about that. It's a much tougher subject. Much tougher subject to talk about. The people want to know, do you prefer Daddy Face-Off or DFO Daddy or Daily Face-Off Daddy? What do you prefer?
I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Guys, our connection's bad. I got to go.
You can't say none. You got to pick one.
Yeah, the answer is none of the above.
Oh, come on. Okay, fine. We'll go with Daddy Face-Off. Frank, about Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes, we were having this conversation on yesterday's show about if you had to start a franchise from scratch, taking into consideration cap hits, all that sort of stuff, which player would you take? Like you're reviving the Atlanta Thrashers, and the Colorado Avalanche and Vancouver Canucks have chosen to leave both of those players unprotected in our scenario here. Which player are you selecting?
How many mushrooms did you need to take in order to come up with that scenario in which both of these teams are like, nah, we're good, take them? The answer for me is kind of simple, and with all due respect to Quinn Hughes and the magical season he's having, I think Cale Makar is the most complete. I think he's the most complete player in the whole league. I think he defends really well. I think he skates better than anyone not named Connor McDavid. I think the minutes that he's able to log almost effortlessly, the ability that he has to touch and impact every facet of the game. The fact that Quinn Hughes has made it a conversation is at least really interesting and a great development if you're a Canucks fan. But Cale Makar is right behind him in terms of points and can actually become the fourth person to score 30 points before playing 17 games in a season as a defenseman. Quinn Hughes becoming the third already. But I just think that from a consistency factor, from a defensive zone factor, from all those things, the answer for me is pretty clear in Cale Makar. I think he is the best defenseman in the game. And more than that, I think when it's all said and done, I think Cale Makar is going to be on the Mount Rushmore of NHL defensemen.
Frank, I wanted to ask you about the World Cup of Hockey. What are you hearing about the format? I know the name might even be changing, timing, things of that nature. What are you hearing recently?
Yeah, Harm, it's not going to be called a World Cup of Hockey. It's an international tournament that's yet to be named, and it's going to be played in February 2025. I think it's like the appetizer international tournament, our entree back into getting the international hockey back on the calendar, which I think is a long overdue and important step. It's going to be a 4-team tournament. It's going to have the US, Canada, Sweden, and Finland. And if you're following along and reading between the lines, that means no Russia. And one of the big reasons why no Russia is because Sweden and Finland have essentially made it really clear to the NHL and the IIHF and others, anyone who will listen, that they're not willing to participate and send their players if there is Russian player involvement. So that kind of made the decision a little bit easier for the NHL and the NHLPA to park it and say, look, we can't really have any sort of international tournament without Sweden and Finland. It's a lot easier to say goodbye to one federation instead of two. And that's sort of the spot that the league and PA have arrived at this point. So more details coming. The format itself, I'm told, is actually quite interesting. You've got the US and Canada and Sweden and Finland playing each other. They're going to play each other twice to start, the two teams in North America and the two teams in Europe. And then the winner and loser of that aggregate series, they're going to cross over and play each other. That still would leave the possibility of the US and Canada meeting in the final. It's going to take place over 1 week, so sort of a slightly extended all-star break. And that's what they're looking at before then heading over to Milan, Italy in 2026 for the Winter Olympics.
How many American Canucks do you think would be on the Team USA roster?
So you've got Quinn Hughes, JT Miller. Just trying to go.
Brock Besser, Thatcher Demko, Connor
Garland.
Garland.
Demko for sure. I'd say Besser and is like, well, the way he's played this year is a yes, but previously was a no. And then Garland, I would say, is probably pretty unlikely. Demko's probably the starting goalie.
Starting goalie? You think so, hey?
Over Hellebuck and on
the way he's played right now, it's not really a question for me.
I like that. That's a good pick. Who wins the best on best tournament, do you think? Which nation?
I mean, I guess tell me what we're getting. Like, are we getting Connor McDavid of last year, or are we getting the 61st ranked scorer in the league this year?
Are we getting one?
Okay, are we getting the Sidney Crosby on pace for 58 goals and 106 points this year? Or are we getting the guy who was, in the low 80s last year? It's so much of it is about timing. So much of it is about chemistry. I will say the U.S. this is going to be the strongest international team they've ever put forward. And it's not even really close. I'd say it's honestly a coin flip.
Yeah, I might give the U.S. a slight edge just because of their blue line and goaltending situation.
It's really the goaltending. Like, that's the big thing. I don't know what happened along the way for Canadian netminders, but that's a huge advantage for the U.S.
Oh, I could talk about that for days, but I won't right now. You go ahead.
But yeah, there's also something I think that's really interesting too when you think about how these teams come together. I do think that there's like a swagger factor that Canada has that the U.S. doesn't. It's just the repeated success, the expectation year after year. The U.S. doesn't really have that, although some of these players that have come through of late have won, things like World Juniors and under 18s and things like that. They don't have the same pressure that Canada does either.
Absolutely. Frank, many Canucks fans have been floating the idea, especially with Carson Soucy going down, about adding a defenseman. And the problem that I've sort of run into is this, simply looking this far ahead of the trade deadline and kind of looking at, well, I don't see a lot of realistic targets out there. What's your take on what the defense market potentially does look like and how realistic it is that the Canucks can swing a move this far in advance of the deadline?
I'm so glad you asked that, Harm, because I actually phoned up a GM, I think 10 days ago. So I'll just be candid, not Patrick Allvin or anyone in the Canucks. And I just said, let's pretend the hypothetical is that the Canucks are out there and they're trying to make a move for a defenseman. Work through your list with me. Tell me what you see, which players are available, which players might potentially be available on the back end that could be fits in Vancouver. And we worked through 90% of the league, and I don't think we had two names on the board. Because you try and handicap that out. And this is, by the way, it's a useful exercise, not just for me, but also for some of these other teams that I talk to. Like, they're going through their own exact, who might this team be targeting? What is this team's needs? Like, it's healthy for them to work through it too. And so sometimes I do it together with them to do the exercise. And I'm not seeing like a fit that jumps out, because part of the big thing when you think about the position is the top four guys, first off, are really hard to get your hands on, and teams that have them aren't really giving them up. And second, you've got to find someone, I think, that fits a bit of Vancouver's age and, more importantly, contract and cap scheme. And yeah, there's defensemen out there that teams are willing to unload, but are you interested in a 34-year-old with 4 years left on his deal whose game has clearly passed him by? Like, I'm not. I'm sure the Canucks aren't. So that's really where the list begins to get short, right?
I wonder. Like, I don't know. Like, Frank, do you get the sense at any point this season, like, are the Canucks going to go after some defensive help? Because we've talked about the targets in Calgary. Are they going to do it at any point this season, do you think?
They're going to do it. I just don't. The question was, have you targeted anyone? Who do you think stands out as likely fits? And I don't have the answer of that. But I do think that they're going to, at some point this year, pull the trigger on someone. But back it up to a year ago at this time, was Filip Hronek on anyone's radar?
That's a good point.
He wasn't even mentioned at all out there. And I told you guys the story previously of how the Canucks ended up landing him. It ended up being so fascinating. It was never talked about. He never made a trade targets board. He was never rumored. It came together very quietly.
Frank, we have a lot of new listeners. Do you mind retelling that story of how Hronek came to Vancouver?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fascinating in that sometimes when managers make calls, the other GM files it away. So basically what happened was about a year or 18 months prior to the Canucks acquiring him, Jim Rutherford had called and asked Steve Yzerman, hey, is Filip Hronek available? And the answer was no. And fast forward to last year, on the day the trade was made, sort of out of the clear blue sky, Steve Yzerman calls and says, are you still interested in Filip Hronek? And the answer is yes. So Steve Yzerman says, here's what we want, and outlined the package. And he said, if you say yes today, we'll complete the trade, and that'll be that. And I won't offer him to anyone else, and his name won't be out there at all. And Jim Rutherford said, essentially, this is relayed to me, give me an hour and I'll call you back. Called him back. Yes, boom, the deal is done. And it ends up being a complete surprise. And that's sort of how sometimes things operate behind the scenes. And it's all because the Canucks made a call, 10, 12, 18 months ahead of time, expressing interest that led them down that path.
That's really interesting because obviously that trade's looking pretty good right now. Do you think it was a fair price for the Canucks to pay?
I do, because here's the thing. At some point, whenever it becomes time for the Canucks to have the extension talk, people are going to see the price whenever that is and say, man, that was expensive. This is a guy who, first off, has fit like a glove for Quinn Hughes. They always seem to be in attack mode. They read so well off of each other, and the point production has been there. But the thing with Filip Hronek is the point production has always been there. He's pretty much been a half a point per game player for 300 NHL games. So not an insignificant total. And by that same token, that's part of what entered into the back of the minds of the Detroit Red Wings, which is, hey, we are entering a space where we're going to need to pay all of our guys, especially some of the younger guys that have broken through. And do we want to devote this cap space and this, salary cap commitment to Filip Hronek? And the answer at the end of the day was no. And so I think the price ended up being fair. Just go back to what I was saying, 2 minutes and 30 seconds ago, which is it's really hard to get your hands on a top 4 defenseman in today's game, let alone someone that fits exactly the age scheme of your team.
Frank, good stuff as always, my friend. Thank you for joining us. Much appreciated.
Wow, that was abrupt. All right, see you guys.
Frank Seravalli. Sorry if that was abrupt, Frank, but the reason I wanted to close that is because there are so many people asking us questions now about, is Rutherford working the phones, all this sort of stuff. A lot of stuff in the YouTube live chat, and we got to get to anyone else. So sorry, Frank. I hope that wasn't too abrupt. And he still does his hit next week. You picked USA, so hopefully he comes on next week. I hope he comes on. He should be. He
will.
He will. Yeah, really fascinating stuff. And I like talking to Frank, obviously, for a variety of reasons. But that Hronek story, I know a lot of people haven't heard that story. So a lot of people in the chat reacting to that. So
I hadn't heard it either.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was actually just thinking last week, I want to make some calls and figure it out. So I guess it saved me a couple phone calls.
There you go. And you know what's so funny is Frank was like, well, I've said this on your show before, and he has. But I said, yeah, we have a lot of new listeners. I should have also said, we also have a new co-host and a new producer who have never heard this story. So there it is, folks. Frank Seravalli, our pal. He's great. And Frank is still in our private studio chat, and he gave us an answer. Sorry, we should have left him on. Sorry, Frank. Frank answered the question. He said Rutherford was making calls in the beginning before Alvin was hired. So there you go. There's your answer on that, folks. Canucks Conversation with Harmon and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher app.